Thank you. I hope you do that when I'm finished as well. Applaud, I mean. So, nice to be here. USI, unexpected sources of inspiration. That's exactly what I want to be for you today. I would like to surprise you, and I hope you will be positively surprised about the stuff I will talk about today. So, I'm based in the corporate center at Statoil, a Norwegian energy company, oil, gas, renewables, 20,000 employees, 30 countries, $50 billion turnover. When I joined Statoil in the early 80s, it was a smaller company than what it is today. And most small organizations, they want to grow, they want to become bigger. Fair enough, and many succeed. But many of those who succeed, become big, they discover that we have not only become big, we also become rigid, bureaucratic, inflexible. We've lost a lot of that agility we had as a smaller organization. And I find an interesting parallel here to the aging process of man. Because as we grow older, we do lose a bit of that flexibility, agility we had as teenagers. And I'm starting to get some practical experience here. And when it comes to man, we have no choice. That's the way it goes, whether we like it or not. Right? Organizations, however, they have a choice. It is written nowhere that because we are big, we should be slow, rigid, bureaucratic, and all the stuff that we don't want to be. So our journey has very much been about trying to find our way back to that agility we had as a smaller organization without losing the benefits of being big. So our big question, how can we be big and small at the same time? And the big question for small organizations should be, how can we grow without ending up in the same misery? So, what I would like to share with you today is first, the case for change. We are in deep shit. Traditional management is broken. That is the bad news. The good news is that there is a solution. It's called beyond budgeting. And again, I think you will be surprised about what this stuff is. And then I want to share with you how we are trying to do this at Statoil. We kicked out the budget and a lot of other things back in 2005, so we've been going for 12 years now, and I've been involved in this since the start. Now, I want to continue with a quote from a wise man, Peter Drucker. Most of what we call management is about making it difficult for people to do their job. And I would agree. I think that's one of the problems. We very often manage too much. If we don't manage performance, there will be no performance. I don't think that's true. Imagine that we had in our organization a machine. It was invented 100 years ago. Fantastic machine, very important for the success of the organization. 50 years ago, this machine started to make some problems. And today, as you can see, it's completely broken. That is a very unrealistic story. That would never have happened. When that machine started to make trouble many years ago, wise people would have gotten together and found a better solution. They would have invented something better because we all love innovation, right? Innovation is fantastic. We want to be leading edge. We want to be unique. We want to be in the forefront. It's fantastic. When it comes to technology and product innovation. But there is also something called management innovation. Management innovation is about exploring new ways of leading and managing in today's business and people realities. Management innovation doesn't seem to be great. That is scary. Kicking out the budget? Are you crazy? Right? And we start here to ask for, well, we call it best practice. I think we mean common practice. What is everybody else doing? Maybe we should call the consultants to make sure that we are not doing anything stupid here. And the consequence is that it is very crowded on the left-hand side. Everybody is into technology and product innovation. Management innovation, however, is not yet the crowded place because it's scary. But that is good news for brave companies who dare to embrace also this kind of innovation, because you can get just as much performance, competitive advantage out of management innovation as you can from technology and product innovation. And I want to share with you some examples a bit later. So it's all about performance, and that's the only reason why we embarked on this journey at Statoil. We believed 12 years ago it would be good for performance. Today we know it is good for performance. So before I talk more about performance, I want to just share with you my budget problem list. The budget and the budgeting mindset is part of why traditional management is broken. So what's the problem with this process? Well, it's a long list. There are weak links often between budget and strategy, very time-consuming, assumptions quickly outdated. Budgeting can stimulate unethical behaviors. The lowballing, the gaming, the internal negotiations, that is not the kind of behavior we would like to see in our organizations. It can create illusions of control. If we don't have control, it is better to acknowledge it and act accordingly than to think you have it and act accordingly. It can lead to decisions being made too early. We have to make all these decisions in the autumn the year before. And sometimes that leads to decisions being made too high up. Doesn't always improve decisions. Sometimes it's actually the other way around. It can prevent us from doing stuff we should have done, but we can't because it's not in the budget. And the other way around. It can lead us to do stuff we shouldn't have done, but it is in the budget, and it is spend it or lose it. Less money next year. I don't know how big problem this is, but it's a bit funny. I call it the accordion forecasting horizon. When we finance people make budgets, we want to understand all of next year, 12 months ahead. Into next year, first quarter, certainly 9 months is enough. We can still see till year end. Mid-year, 6 months is enough, then 3 months is enough, before we certainly get interested in the full year again, because it's budget time, we want to understand next year. So you have this accordion forecasting horizon, at least a bit funny. Last but not least, budget can very often, or is very often, a very bad yardstick for evaluating performance. To define good performance as hitting the budget number is very often a meaningless, narrow, mechanical performance language. We need something more intelligent, something broader. And these problems are more than irritating itches in an organization. So they are symptoms of a much bigger problem, which is also a paradox, because this process was invented 100 years ago with the very best of intentions. The inventor was called James O. McKinsey, the founder of McKinsey Consulting. I don't know the guy, but I don't think that was an evil guy. I think he had the best of intentions to help organizations perform better. And maybe it worked 100 years ago. It probably did. Maybe even 50 years ago. But no longer today, because as we will come back to, things have changed. Today, this process has become more of a barrier than a support for great performance in organizations. And that is a big problem. But again, back to performance. It's all about performance. And I would like now to reflect around this important word in a slightly different setting than organizations. I would like us to move into traffic. Because when we are driving to work in the morning, back home, whatever, I guess we all would like to experience good performance in the sense of a safe and good flow, right? By the way, I never understood why they call it the rush hour or rush traffic. There is no rush at all. All those cars are standing dead still. But anyway, there's a lot of things I don't understand. So, traffic authorities, they want exactly the same. And here is something we often meet, put up by traffic authorities to create a safe and good flow. 2 questions here. Who is in control based on which information? And the one who is in control here is the one who programmed this light. And where would that person be as you are sitting there waiting for the green light? That person would be in the office programming the next light, or in bed if you're out driving at night. That person would not be in the situation. Which information would this programming be based on? It would be based on some historical trends, on forecasts about how things might develop, but it would not be entirely fresh information as you sit there waiting. But again, the best of intentions trying to create a safe and good flow. Fortunately, there is an alternative to the traffic light. The roundabout, the very different solution, exactly the same purpose. Same questions, very different answers. Who is in control here? Well, we are as drivers. Based on which information? Based on fresh, real-time, here and now information. So very different answers. Could be interesting to compare these 2 ways of managing. So let's do that. And this is the first of my many leading questions today. Which is most efficient of these 2? Well, it's been proven that the roundabout is more efficient. Which is most difficult to drive in? Well, we all know that it's more difficult to drive in a roundabout. And back to our organizations for a minute. Everything we are trying to leave behind in Statoil of traditional management is, from a leadership point of view, much easier than the stuff that we now are trying to do. But our guiding star cannot be to go for what's easy because it's easy. We have to go for the stuff that's good for performance. And sometimes that is a bit more challenging. Leadership is not meant to be easy. Is it relevant to talk about values in this setting of traffic? In Statoil, we have something we call the Statoil book. It's our most important document. It talks about who we are, what we believe in, how we work. Everything I'm talking about will be in this book. And this book says a lot about values-based management. And the opposite, we could maybe call rules-based management. The traffic light is a good example of rules-based management. Red is stop, green is drive. We can always discuss yellow. But beyond that, it's a very simple rules-based system. And if there is a value set among drivers waiting for the green light here, which is about me first, I don't care about the rest, that mindset is normally not a big problem in front of that light. But in the roundabout, me first, don't care about the rest, can actually be a big problem. Because in the roundabout, we are much more dependent on people having a positive common purpose of wanting this to flow well. We have to help each other. We have to make own intentions visible. We have to interpret other people's intentions. We have to interact with people in a very different way than what we need to do here. So it's not enough with fresh information authority to act on it. We also need a positive value set. Trust is another relevant word here. Here, in front of that light, traffic authorities don't trust us to make decisions. In the roundabout, they trust us. Transparency is another relevant word. Ahead of that light, the only thing you need to see, in theory, is the color of the light, nothing else. Then you can make decisions, right? In the roundabout, that is not enough. You need to see everything. You need full transparency in order to make the right decisions. This is a situation where the label performance management makes sense. I don't like that label, by the way. But in the roundabout, that is not about performance management. That's not about managing performance. That is about enabling performance. It's about creating conditions for great performance to take place. And that is more than playing with words. That is a very different way of thinking. The roundabout is a more self-regulating way of managing. And when we now go back to our organizations, I would argue that in today's business and people realities, we need more self-regulating management models for at least two reasons. The first reason is external. It has to do with our business environment, which has a lot of what we, and you might have heard that expression, it has a lot of what we call VUCA, V-U-C-A, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. If we take that VUCA seriously, it should have big implications for how we design our management models compared to if there's no VUCA out there, right? That should be quite obvious. There was, by the way, a lot less VUCA when I started my budget and planning career in Statoil back in the early 80s. And just for the record, my first management job in Statoil in 1984, that was head of the corporate budget department. So I've done a lot of stupid things in my life, at least on the professional side. Anyway, that is one reality we need to reflect on, the world out there. The other reality we need to reflect on is not external, it's internal. It has to do with people. It has to do with asking ourselves an important question. What kind of people do we generally believe that we have in our organizations? And one language or label for that important discussion was developed by a guy called Douglas McGregor back in 1960. He introduced what he called Theory X and Theory Y. Two opposing views on people, what motivates people, what makes people perform. Theory X is very much the negative view on people. That is a view that most people in an organization is a bunch of potential thieves and crooks, which all must be managed tightly, kept on short leashes, because if not, we know what will happen. They will all run away, do a lot of stupid things, and spend money like drunken sailors. Well, McGregor, he was a bit more polite in his book, but I think that's what he meant. Then you have Theory Y, very much the opposite view, a view that most people, beyond the fact that there is a lot of education and competence, that most people actually want to perform. They want to do a good job. They want to be involved. They want to be listened to. They want to be treated as adults. And we don't need to agree so far on where our sympathy should lie, Theory X or Theory Y, but it should be quite obvious that if we mainly believe in Y, the implications for our management model should be very different compared to if we mainly believe in X. That is a no-brainer. If we combine these two realities we need to reflect on, so the world out there, people in the organization, it could look like this. You recognize the two dimensions, and I would argue that traditional management lies in this lower left-hand corner. The way out of this is to address both leadership horizontally, management processes vertically, and what we need to get out of, it's something that's very rigid, it's very detailed, very annual, a lot of rules-based micromanagement, centralized command and control, and a lot of secrecy and a strong belief in sticks and carrots as ways to drive performance. There might have been a time when this was the right thing to do. I'm not arguing that. There might still be places around where it's the right thing to do. But for us in Statoil, that discussion is completely uninteresting because we know that our business environment is way up here with a lot of VUCA, and that goes way beyond the uncertainty around the oil price. And we believe that most people in Statoil is on this side and not here. Not everybody. We do have people in this category. And you have probably the same in your organizations, but that is not the issue. The issue is, do these guys represent a minority or a majority? Because if they exist but represent the minority, and this is where you find the majority, then it is the majority that must drive the design of our management models. This is just like in a free society. We don't put everybody in jail because someone has done or will do something wrong. We are, after all free citizens within certain boundaries. So the way out of this, addressing both leadership and management processes. On the leadership side, we need to be more values-based than rules-based. This does not mean that we should have no rules. It simply means that the stronger you are on the value side, the less rules you typically need. We need more autonomy. In this VUCA world, there isn't always time to run 9 floors up to get that decision, because then it can be too late. And with these people on board, it isn't always necessary either, because very often they can make great decisions for themselves. We need more transparency. And this is good news for all the scared managers I have met over the years. Scared managers who are afraid of leaving this rather comfortable corner because they are afraid of losing control. And that fear is real. I can see it in their eyes. But what they maybe haven't understood is that a lot of those controls are nothing but an illusion of control. But the fear is still real. So here's good news for scared managers. Transparency can be a very efficient control mechanism. A social control mechanism. There is a reason why most thieves and crooks prefer to operate at night, because then it's dark. There's no transparency. Nice little story from Swiss pharmaceutical Roche. You might have heard it. Quite traditionally managed company, but they did a very interesting experiment around travel cost. In a pilot, they kicked out the travel budget, kicked out all travel rules and regulations. What they introduced instead was full transparency. So with a few exceptions, everybody could see everything. If you traveled, to where, did you fly, eat, and sleep, cheap or expensive? Open for your colleagues to see, and vice versa. Guess what happened with travel cost in the pilot? Came down radically compared to the rest of the organization. Last but not least, internal intrinsic motivation. And I hope it isn't necessary to explain to you that you don't need to do much reading to learn that in knowledge organizations operating in a VUCA world, then mastery, autonomy, purpose, belonging is more effective than money, more effective than individual bonus. Unfortunately, there's a lot of managers out there who obviously haven't done the reading. In Statoil, we have always tried to be a values-based, people-oriented company. This book says a lot about it. I'm not saying we're perfect, but as we were growing, we were adapting more and more management processes that had a different message. And it doesn't help to have these theory Y leadership visions if you have theory X management processes. So our journey has very much been about trying to change our management processes to reflect what we say and believe in about people, while at the same time making our management processes more VUCA robust. So here are things that you typically need to do on the management process side. Typically, the detailed annual traditional budget needs to go because it represents so much of what lies down here. More specifically, when we are setting targets and goals, we need to think differently as well. It doesn't help that we hit 29.2 if the other guys are doing 30 and 35. or vice versa. So we need to think more in relative terms, more football, more league tables. We need more dynamics into our processes. Why on earth shall everything we do circulate around an accounting invention called the fiscal year of January to December? Right? We need to organize our processes where it's possible, where it makes sense, on more event-driven rhythms, more business-driven rhythms, and less calendar-driven rhythms. And last but not least, when we shall evaluate performance, we need what we call a holistic performance evaluation, which is about more than measurement. And I'll come back to what that means in practice. And this, dear friends, was a crash course in Beyond Budgeting. This is what Beyond Budgeting is about. Trying to address both leadership and management processes in a coherent, consistent way in order to become more agile and more human. It is as simple and as difficult as that. A number of organizations is on this journey in some form or shape. Here is a taste of some of them. Some Scandinavian companies on the left-hand side here. In the middle, some other European companies, some North American companies on the right-hand side, and some South American, Asian companies in between, and also a very exciting Chinese company. Watch out for the guys at Haier. You will hear a lot about Haier in the coming years if you haven't heard about it. The world's biggest white goods producer. Extremely fascinating company. I could have spent the rest of the day and tomorrow talking about fantastic management innovation taking place in organizations here. We don't have the time. So I'll limit myself quickly to two examples. Let's start in Norway. Miles. It's a Norwegian IT company. No budgets, no targets, no nothing. Their most important process is recruitment. Their philosophy is that if we get it right at recruitment, everything else follows. So when they recruit people, they never take less than 10 references. When they interview, the whole interview is about your attitudes, beliefs, values. They don't talk IT at all. They leave that talk to skilled IT people already on board. They can check for the IT competence. And if those guys says no, it is a no. They have a veto right. Doesn't matter what management is saying. If you work for Miles, you can buy whatever PC you want, as expensive as you want, and replace it as often as you want. You can attend whatever course, conference you want, wherever in the world, as often as you want. There are no travel budgets, no PC budgets, no nothing. The only thing Miles require is that when you have bought that PC, returned from that training, you have to post on the intranet what you did and the cost of it. So transparency is the control mechanism. The company is doing fantastic in financial terms, came out second in Great Place to Work in Europe, amazing company. But the veteran here is a Swedish bank on top of this list, Handelsbanken. Operates across Europe, has around 800 branches, the fastest growing bank in the UK for the time being. No budgets, no targets, they hardly make forecasting. And they kicked out all of this already back in 1970. So we have a very nice long period to look back on to see, does this stuff work? Is it good for performance? Because if it isn't, we shouldn't do it. Let's look at a few performance facts in Handelsbanken. This bank has been performing better than the average of its competitors every single year since 1972. This is among the most cost-effective universal banks in Europe. And this bank has never needed any bailout or help from the authorities because they messed it up. I can think of a number of other prestigious banks that at some point in time needed help. This bank never. It can't be a coincidence. Radically different management model, a lot of decentralization, a lot of autonomy, and fantastic, consistent results over so long time. I don't have time to go in depth, but it's a very fascinating case. Handelsbanken and some other companies inspired what became known as Beyond Budgeting in the late 90s. So this was something that was growing from organizations, people like us, that rebelled against traditional ways of thinking. This did not come from academia. This did not come from the consulting business. Both are very interested now, but it came from people like us. And the principles look like this. We don't, again, have time to go in detail, but you will recognize that, again, we talk about leadership, we talk about management processes. I have already touched about some of these leadership principles, purpose, values, transparency, autonomy, as some examples. I'll briefly come back to what management processes can mean when we now move to Statoil in a minute. What is important is that these principles represent a philosophy, guiding. This is not the management recipe. Right? What this should mean in your organization depends on your business, culture, history. So it's not identical what has happened in these organizations I just showed. And that's the way it should be. I don't like management recipes, and there's a lot of them out there. Because in a management recipe, it's all about kind of read the books, hire the consultants, tick the boxes. I find that quite boring and also quite dangerous. So if you like to think for yourself, there's a lot of good news in implementing beyond budgeting. Let's move to Statoil. When we started out in Statoil 12 years ago, we were actually a bit careful showing these slides this slide too broadly, because it can be a bit scary, big stuff, right? And if you scare people, you risk not getting started. Today, that's not an issue. I do a lot of internal leadership training, and this slide is always with us. But at that time, we started in a less scary place, more specifically related to the budget, but a great place to get started to later come into these important discussions. We asked ourselves a very simple question: why do we budget? What's the purpose of a budget? And for an organization, that question typically leads to 3 different answers. That we used to make budgets for 3 different reasons. We used budgets to set targets, financial targets, sales targets, production targets. At the same time, that budget represents the kind of forecast of what could next year look like in terms of cash flow, financial capacity. And last but not least, it's a resource allocation mechanism, right? Handing out bags of money, cost, investments. And it sounds very efficient, 3 things in one, just like a financial Kinder egg, 3 things in the same process. But that is also the problem, because these things don't go well together. First of all, a target should have a little bit of ambition, a little bit up here. A forecast should not be ambitious. That should be brutally honest, reflect what we think will happen, whether we like what we see or not. Can't be the same number. Or what happens if we ask our salespeople for a good sales forecast, but they all know that that sales forecast will come back to me as a sales target for next year, and there's a sales bonus linked to hitting that sales target. We all know what then happens. So the solution here is to separate this into 3 different processes, and that can become different numbers because it is different things. And once you have separated, you can start to improve each of these purposes in ways not possible when it's all bundled in a budget number. So how can we set targets that really inspire people, where people stretch without feeling stretched, that are more VUCA robust? Some organizations conclude that we don't need all these targets. Some actually conclude we don't need targets at all. How can we have a lean, simple, unbiased forecasting process, which is only about forecast? It's not the bid into a target negotiation. It is not an application for resources. It is just a forecast. And last but not least, how can we manage costs without the traditional detailed budget? And again, I don't have time to go in detail, but the very short version of how we do it at Statoil is that for projects, and for us, project is about building big stuff at sea, and pipelines and platforms and so on. For projects, 2 simple principles. The bank is always open. You can always forward a project for approval. If you get a yes or a no, depends on 2 things. How good is your project against the criteria we have, and how good is it compared to other projects? Right? Second question, do we have the capacity, financial capacity, for instance, to do this? So how good is your project? Do we have the financial capacity? For other costs, operating costs, admin costs, and so on, we have a menu of different alternatives. It could be a burn rate guiding, operate in the range of 10 million until something else is decided. Within that, full freedom. It could be a unit cost target. You can spend more if you produce more. It could be a benchmark unit cost target. It could be nothing at all. We only look at actual cost, monitor actual cost, intervene when there's a need for it. So a very simple, dynamic resource allocation mechanism. And my metaphor or comparison back to agile will be that this is continuous delivery of resources. The big annual detailed budget is too big of a batch. You have to slice it up. This is continuous delivery. And how can all of this be done more event-driven, less calendar-driven? Quick example of what more VUCA-robust targets can mean. These are the most important financial targets in Statoil. And by the way, these 2 KPIs definitely have their weaknesses, but the point is that we think in relative terms. We don't have any absolute targets. Return on capital, no absolute target. It's all about doing well against competition. This is probably the closest our board comes to approve a budget. And we call these Evergreen Targets. We've had the same targets now for almost 10 years. We don't need a big process every year to recalculate here. And these to drive the common bonus scheme we have in Statoil, everybody on board, us against the competition. Let me then, towards the end, share with you how it all comes together in our management process, which we call ambition to action. It's a kind of hybrid between the balanced scorecard beyond budgeting. 3 purposes: translating strategy, securing flexibility, and last but not least, to activate important words in this book. Then there are some steps here in this process that, as they appear here, do not seem that unique, but the way we do this is different. But it starts with translating strategy into strategic objectives. What does success look like in a medium-term time horizon? So we are more on words than on numbers. Then we are trying to find KPIs that can measure that we are moving towards these objectives. The only problem with measurement is that measurement alone moves nothing. Nothing happens just because we measure. You don't lose weight simply by weighing yourself. And I know, because I've tried. And that was not a big success. And then my wife, she told me that, Bjarte, maybe you didn't stand there long enough. Anyway, that would have been one kind of action, but the point is that nothing happens unless we do something. And last but not least, a translation over into what does this mean for you and me and the teams that we are in. And here is a good example of activating important words in the book. The very first words in the Statoil book reads as follows: the way we deliver is as important as what we deliver. And with the way we deliver, we talk about the values in this book. And the weighting between the what and the how in all consequences for your career, for your base pay, and for your individual bonus if you're on that scheme, the weighting between the two is 50-50. Here is an example of an ambition to action. It's a bit busy, but you get a flavor of what this is. And today, you recognize the 3 steps from the previous slide, and then the HR process following then on the right-hand side. So this is an attempt to develop an integrated performance process that runs all the way from strategy via finance territory into HR territory, hanging seamlessly together. And by the way, we call it the performance process, not the performance management process. The word performance management does not exist in this book. Today, we have around 800 of these in the company, and let me use this slide towards the end to share with you 2 other areas where we try to be different. The first has to do with creating alignment here. How do we get these to hang together? There is an easy way, which is the wrong way. That's called cascading. Sitting on top, and then corporate instructing all the way down. These are your objectives, KPIs, KPI targets, and so on. And you can get a beautiful mechanical, mathematical alignment. As finance people, we can add together all the numbers down here, and it matches the corporate number up there, and we sleep well at night. We are going to deliver because it all hangs together. Well, I wish it was that simple. Because in our culture, that kind of top-down mechanical command and control destroys everything around involvement, motivation, commitment. And then mechanical alignment is worthless. So we need to do something else. It's a bit more challenging, but the right thing to do. We call it translation, which means that when this team shall make their own ambition to action, this team would sit down together and look around. They would look one level up, further up, maybe all the way to corporate. They would look left and right if they have relations this way. And then that team would have a deep and good discussion. What should our ambition to action look like in order to support those that we have a relationship to? When it comes to ambition level, direction. If such a translation should go wrong, of course the team above should do what they are paid for, but it's not the problem. One reason is, again, transparency. Because with a few exceptions, all of these ambition to actions are open, accessible for all employees. There's no place to hide with a stupid ambition to action. That doesn't mean that we never cascade. There are critical situations where a little doses of that can be justified from time to time, but it should be the exception and not the rule. And when then it's applied, it's also more accepted because people know that this is a special situation. Last issue here, time. We used to have annual versions of these ambition to actions, not anymore. Now these teams can change whatever they want on their own ambition to action when there is a need for it, at any time. They can change objectives if strategy changed. They can change KPIs if objectives change, or if they simply find a better KPI. They can even change their KPI targets if these targets have lost their meaning. Impossible to achieve, piece of cake. But again, it's not an anarchy. We have a very simple control mechanism. We have said that if you want to change something that's big, you still need to seek approval one level up. It's a very simple process, no stamps, no signatures, but you have to talk to somebody of one level up. If it's a small change, you simply inform to the same level. Big or small, always make sure that you inform others affected by your changes. This is the coordination part of it. And we have left it to the organization itself to define what is big and what's small. We can't define that on behalf of all these teams, right? So there might be a different definition here than here, but that's okay, as long as they work both places. So back to the self-regulation. The more self-regulating this can run, the better. It's not mandatory to have one of these teams decide for themselves. And the motivation for having one should be that this is something that the team perceives as helping them to help themselves. Targets, why should targets have a deadline of, all targets have a deadline of end of December? Doesn't make sense. We want more natural time horizons, right? So if there's urgency, put 3 months. If it's more complex, put 18 months. We haven't banned end-of-year targets, but it should be the exception. And again, more and more often, we don't set targets. It's enough to measure that things are moving in the right direction. We know what good looks like. We don't always have to set targets. Forecasting, many do rolling forecasting to get out of the according principle, update every quarter, 5 quarters ahead all the time. We do something else, we call it dynamic forecasting. So these teams update their own forecast when stuff happens in their own business reality. They don't do it for us upstairs, they do it for themselves in order to manage their own business. So as I'm standing here, somebody in Statoil is updating something on production, cost, investments, whatever. All goes into a common database. We have a global SAP solution. And from corporate, we can tap into this information when we need it. Let me finish with a very important principle in the model, holistic performance evaluation. And holistic means 2 things here. Again, it's back to the 50-50 between the what and the how. But holistic also means that when we shall evaluate what we have delivered, which is defined by ambition to action, that cannot just be an exercise of adding together the number of red and green KPIs. Because if it was only about that, the only qualification our managers would need would be 2 things. They must be able to count, and they can't be colorblind. Anyway, there is one more reason why that is stupid. It has to do with the I in KPI. What does it stand for? Key performance indicators, right? These are indicating whether we are moving towards our objectives or not, but they are not necessarily telling the full truth. There is a reason why they are not called KPTs, key performance truth. They are called key performance indicators. We can't base our entire management on indications, right? So we can start with these indications, but then we have to take off our measurement glasses and look at what measurement didn't pick up. We have to pressure test what was measured by asking some simple questions. I see that your KPI is green, but have we really moved towards those objectives? How ambitious were your targets? Should we punish people who stretched and didn't completely make it? Were there other people who lowballed and gamed and maybe made it? Has there been significant changes in assumptions, headwind, tailwind of such a nature that we should take it into account? Which risks were taken here? And what we have delivered, is it sustainable? So applying common assessment, common sense, pressure testing, what we have measured. And when that is done, we can have a view on performance. We have a 5-by-5 rating scale. We are discussing if we shall drop that. I hope that will be the outcome. I'm not a big fan of rating, but for me, the important thing is that we have this holistic evaluation. So that is what I wanted to share with you. This was a quick and kind of rushy journey through what this stuff is. If you're even more interested, feel free to contact me. If you need help in your organization, it's something we do if we can find the time. There's actually a number of big French companies who are on this journey now. Check out the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable, global network of organizations on this journey. And if you're even more interested, then what you just heard is was the short version, and this is the long version. I wrote a book 8 years ago about my own journey, and I've just finished a significantly updated 2nd edition because so much has happened over the last 8 years. It's an easy read, being translated right now to two languages on the opposite end of the scale, Chinese and Icelandic. So, thank you very much.